Want to create clean and simple cards that look stunning but with minimal effort? You're in the right place, because in this video I'll show you a mind-blowing 5-minute card that's unbelievably easy to put together. Plus, in card number 2, I'll reveal a clever way to stretch your better press plates, and don't worry if you don't have them, because I have an easy alternative trick to share with you. Let's get started. I received these 3 beautiful lace border press plates from Spellbinders, and I'll be using 2 of them along with the cutting dies. You can use the press plates to create the design and cut out a border with the coordinating die. Actually, you can use just the cutting die with or without the better press plate to cut out pretty borders, or you can use the better press plates on their own without the edge dies, whatever takes your fancy. These are beautiful and very intricate designs. I've had this better press plate system for a few months, but I just haven't used it as much. Maybe a couple of times, so I'm really excited to give this another whirl. I'll be using this thank you press plate sentiment on the card. So here's what I'm planning. I want to have the border cut out not only on the front panel, but also on the card base. The reason is that I want to create a bit of a shadow layer here. So I'll cut out the bottom border first and then place the card panel over it. Let's start with cutting out the border on the card base. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine. I'll use one of my new cutting plates on top to avoid getting any of the scratch marks and gunk from the used cutting plate, which is really badly scratched up. I'll tape down the die firmly with some washi tape, and I'll tape it both to the cardstock as well as to the cutting plate to ensure nothing shifts during the die cutting. Now I have my border cut out, but I see a little mark over here, but fortunately it's not too visible, so we'll just roll with it. But unfortunately, I can see that I didn't center the die correctly. You see, this scallop is wider than this one. So the only option I have right now is to adjust my original plan and slice off this part and redo the border, which will make the front asymmetrical, but I think it's going to be a happy accident. I want to ensure I have the die centered this time around. And now this is done. I'll score the panel at 4 1/4 inches so that the back remains the A2 size, but the front is a little bit shorter, like an asymmetrical fold as I just mentioned. I like to score both sides of the cardstock, especially if it's a heavier weight cardstock. I'll fold the card base and burnish the fold. I like to use the silicone grip of my scissors to do this since my bone folder is a little bit flimsy. Let me try the card front now. I'll place it just a bit above the lace border on the card base, and for that I need to resize the card panel before I use the better press plate on it. I'll use a pencil to mark where I need to trim. I'm going to bring in my magnetic mat and plan this out because right now I have a little less real estate than I'd originally planned to play with, so I need to get the layout perfected. I'll use the scripty thank you sentiment, which needs to go here. Now, I don't want to lose this arrangement, so I'll use some washi tape to hold the press plate in place. I basically need to ensure the distance between the thank and the border plate doesn't get messed up. Now I'll load up the press plates into my better press system and remove the washi tape, because the moment I apply ink to the plates, the tape will get inky and transfer the ink to the card panel. So all I needed this washi tape for was the layout. Plus, the bed of the better press system is magnetic and it's going to hold the press plates in place. I'm using the grid lines to help me line up the press plates, and I need the plate right at the edge of the card here. The swoosh of the T will be hanging off the edge of the card panel, and now I'll place the U. The swoosh of the U will also hang off the edge of the card on the other side, creating a balanced arrangement. I'll line up the card panel really carefully, making sure the edge of the press plate is up against the edge of the panel. To ensure the card panel doesn't shift, I'll just add a little bit of tape runner on this side so it picks up the card panel and holds on to it. Now I'll ink this up using Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide because I wanted something close to a tone-on-tone effect for this card. By the way, if you're looking for the list of supplies, you'll find affiliate links in my blog post that is linked in the description. It would help me out a lot if you use the links in case you decide to purchase any of these supplies. While they won't cost you anything extra, it will definitely help out my channel. So thank you very much if you decide to support me. I'll wipe off the excess ink around the press plates, although it won't really transfer the card, but I like to keep things tidy. I'll now place the transparent plate called the platen with the card panel on the chase, which is the bottom magnetic plate, and run it through my Spellbinder's die cutting machine. Now it's time for the big reveal. And look at how absolutely gorgeous this is. I'll give this a second to dry while I clean up the plates with some water and a microfiber cloth. This is an oxide ink, so it's water soluble and it cleans up really well. The ink would have dried off already, and remember I'd stuck down the card panel with some tape runner, so I'll lift this off very gently. Now I need to die cut out the border again. I'll align the die very carefully with the design and tape it down again. This is now perfectly cut out, but as I was checking the alignment, I noticed that the left side had a tiny overhang. So the best way to fix it would be to add some dimension so that the overhang becomes barely visible. I'll use foam tape behind the panel and stick it down to the card base. I accidentally lifted the entire backing paper on the first foam strip. I normally don't do that, and I removed the backing paper only partially, so it's much easier to stick the panel down without it getting skewed. Anyway, I'll have to be careful with this one. I'll press down the card panel onto the base and erase the pencil mark I made earlier. The white border on the card base was looking a bit too stark, so I decided to use the strip I'd trimmed away from the card front earlier and add it to the card base. But before I adhere it, I wanted to add the lace design to the strip to mirror the one on the card front. So I brought back my Better Press system and I've aligned the card front with the press plate to ensure I have the border in the correct place. I'll apply a tiny bit of glue behind the strip of cardstock, lift it off with the clear plate, ink up the press plate, and run the sandwich through the die cutting machine again. I need to remove a tiny sliver from the lace strip before I stick it inside the card base. Since the strip is really narrow, I'll use a post-it note to hold on to it so it's easier to hold it down while cutting. This is one of the many crafty hacks I've learned from Jennifer McGuire, and I put together 20 of the most brilliant hacks from card makers into a video. I'll link the video in the description so you can check that out. One last thing before I adhere the strip is to adhere a piece of lightweight cardstock inside the card. I'll use a bit of liquid glue to stick it down. Since I added the card panel to the front, the back feels a little flimsy, so adhering another A2 sized panel inside will reinforce the back as well. Time to glue the lace border on the inside. Keep watching and I'll tell you how I use the Better Press plate for stamping on vellum, a great way to stretch your supplies. To finish off the card, I added some enamel dots I got quite some time ago from AliExpress. I think overall this card turned out really elegant, yet it was so simple. If I didn't have to explain the process and if I hadn't messed up the border the very first time, this card would have taken less than 5 minutes to make. So I created another card using the Better Press borders and the cutting die. This time I used this one. It's another beautiful border. I used both the cutting dies for this. What I did was place the press plates on my table facing down and then lifted it off using my 2 strong magnets I use on my magnetic mat. They acted like handles, and then I rubbed the press plate design side down into an ink pad to ink it up and then stamped the press plate on the vellum with it. You could use the vellum in the BetterPress system, but I saw a couple of issues with it. Applying glue to the vellum to attach it to the top plate would show through the vellum. And since the vellum is very thin, it wouldn't pick up a letterpress effect anyway, so it was easier to just stamp with the press plates. I used peacock feathers for my ink and then applied clear embossing powder to it and heat set the powder. Then of course I cut out the two sides so it would look like real lace. I adhered a narrow strip of white cardstock underneath to give it some dimension, and I did this by dabbing some liquid glue with a sponge which wouldn't be visible through the vellum. Then I went ahead and used the Vivid Blooms die set to cut out a larger flower and some of the smaller flowers, flower centers, and foliage using the dies. I also used the sentiment from an old Spellbinder stamp set and I heat embossed it using the Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide again, the same ink I used on the lacy border. This is another very simple card and took me around 5 minutes to put together, minus the die cutting of course that possibly took another 5 minutes. But look how pretty it is. I hope you'll try this soon. And even if you don't have a BetterPress system and these press plates, you can use your small stamps to create a repetitive pattern like a border and heat emboss on a vellum belly band. You can do the same with the first card as well. Use a simple but bold sentiment on the card front and a repetitive pattern with a small stamp to create the border. And if you're interested in seeing 5 more ways to use vellum and several tips on gluing vellum without making it ugly, you should check out this video here.